Thank you, Gordon, and good evening, everyone. So we're going to look then this evening at the 1st of Samuel chapter 11, which was just read together. I want to start, please, in the 1st of Samuel and chapter 31. If you just turn there with me first of all. In 1st of Samuel 31, we have recorded for us the death of Saul, and of course the chapter that we've read together concerns King Saul, and that's right at the start of his kingship. But here we see the end of Saul's kingship. 1 Samuel 31 verse 6, So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armour-bearer, and all his men, that same day together. And so Saul's body is taken, but then in verse 11 something happens, and whenever I read this in the readings, I always think, it's a very strange incident this is. What are these people doing? Verse 11, When the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So what a thing for these people of Jabesh Gilead to do, to come and rescue the body of Saul and his sons so they're not being disgraced by the Philistines. And the incident that we've read together this evening in 1 Samuel chapter 11 is the reason for their commitment and their love of Saul and what he did for them. So that's why this incident at the death of Saul takes place, because of what we're going to look at this evening in 1 Samuel chapter 11. So, and we just read the chapter, and it's quite a straightforward chapter in that we just get narrative, and it describes for us this the battle that takes place and the result of it. If you're in 1 Samuel chapter 11, I'd recommend putting something in there and leaving in there like a bookmark, because we'll be coming backwards and forwards to it. So this follows on from the anointing of Saul, well, not the anointing, but the choosing of Saul at the end of 1 Samuel chapter 10. And we know that some men were doubting whether this man was the right choice, that why would this man be someone who's going to reign over us? And we'll see how that attitude changes by the end of our chapter. Then just a brief summary of the chapter. We have in verses 1 to 3, the people of Jabesh Gilead threatened by Nahash, who is the king of Ammon. We then find that they appeal to Saul, and from verses 4 to 8, Saul gets the people together and they're ready to come and fight. Then from verse 9 through to verse 11, we have a record of the destruction of the Ammonites. And then from verse 12 to the end of the chapter, we have the doubters of Saul brought forward. They're not killed, and we find that Saul is anointed and God is worshipped. And so we see this evening that Saul seems to make quite a positive start to his reign as King of Israel, and hopefully as we go through this evening we'll see that coming out. Now, to start with, can we turn to the back of our Bibles and just have a look at our maps, because there's 1 or 2 locations which I mentioned, and it might just be worth having a little look at where they are. If you have an Oxford Bible, I'm going to be looking mostly on map 3. So the locations we've got mentioned in the chapter are Ammon, we've got Jabesh Gilead, we've got Gibeah, Bezek and Gilgal. So Ammon is an area off to the east side of Israel, so the other side on the River Jordan, and in my Bible it's in quite bold letters, so it's quite a large area, the area of Ammon. So these are the people that are coming up to attack Jabesh Gilead. Jabesh Gilead itself is again on the east side of Jordan, very close to the River Jordan, south of, or just a little bit south of the Sea of Galilee. So quite north in Israel, just off the River Jordan and a little bit south of, of Galilee. We've then got Gibeah of Saul, and that's where Saul comes from, understandably. And that is just north of Jerusalem, so further south in Israel. if you find Jerusalem, and you'll find that Gibeah is directly north of Jerusalem. And then Bezek will come up later on, and that is sort of, if you go back up to Jabesh Gilead and look on the other side of the river, sort of equally distant from the River Jordan, but on the other side is Bezek. And then Gilgal is the final place that's mentioned, and again you'll have to travel further south, quite close to the Dead Sea, and also the River Jordan, just by Jericho. That's the area of, or the city or town of Gilgal. So those are the places that I'm going to mention this evening. That's sort of the general geography that we're going to be thinking about. And there are a number of characters, if you come back to Samuel, who are mentioned in the chapter. We've got Nahash, who's the king who comes against Jabesh Gilead. We've got Saul, who has just been chosen to be king. And also we've got the prophet Samuel. Now Nahash, if we read together verse 1, then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, make a covenant with us and we will serve thee. Doesn't sound like a particularly nice character, and well, obviously in this incident he wasn't. But it's interesting to note that he seems to become firm friends with David, unless, I guess the possibility is it could be a title. If you just come have a look at 1 Chronicles chapter 19. So 1 Chronicles chapter 19, and we're just going to look at verses 1 and 2. Now it came to pass after this, that Nahash the king of the children of Ammon died, and his son reigned in his stead. And David said, I will show kindness unto Hanun the son of Nahash, because his father showed kindness to me. And David sent messengers to comfort him concerning his father. So there's obviously, since this incident took place in 1 Samuel, a relationship that's built up between Nahash the king of Ammon and David, who we know succeeded Saul as being king. Now we've also got Saul in our chapter, and as I've mentioned, he does seem to make a good start to his kingship. We'll notice that in verse 6 we have the Spirit of God coming upon him. That in verse 13, we'll come on to this later, that he seems to be a merciful king. And then we've also got Samuel, who was coming to the end of his rulership, his leadership over the people, but the people still looked to him for an influence. If you just have a look at verse 12, the people said to Samuel, that's who the people are looking to still at this time. And again, he is involved with the anointing of Saul at the end of the chapter. So those are our locations and our characters. Let's start then to go through the record. Now, what I'm going to tell you this evening are my thoughts about what I've come across in the chapter. We'll have time for discussion at the end. Hopefully, if you feel like you want to challenge what I've said or add to it or whatever, feel free, okay? Because this is just what I've been able to pick out from the chapter, but you may have other things that may come from it. So verse 1 we've already read. The people of Jabesh Gilead come and say, we want to make a covenant with you, but Nahash is not willing to make that covenant. And in fact, he's so strongly against that covenant that he says in verse 2, on this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. Or it would be a disgrace for all Israel if their right eyes were put out because of this covenant that was made. So he's not willing to make a covenant. Now, we know that the people of Israel were not to make covenants with those who were round about them. We find that out in Exodus chapter 23. So that's a possibility for why it might have been a disgrace here or a reproach upon all Israel if their eyes had been put out, because that would be a sign that a covenant had been made. So that's a suggestion for why it would be a reproach for all Israel. Now, in mentioning Jabesh Gilead at the start, I forgot to talk about where this town or where this city had come from. What's the history behind it? And we're going to go a few times this evening to Judges chapter 20 and Judges chapter 21. Just come back first of all to Judges chapter 21. Because we'll see here why the people of Jabesh Gilead might have been in a bit of trouble. We have the incident in Judges where the people of Benjamin are destroyed by the other tribes because of something they've done wrong, and we'll look at that a little later on. And then they're worried, well, we can't get rid of the tribe of Benjamin. They're sad. If you have a look, Judges 21 verse 3, and said, O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel? So they're worried that they're going to be a tribe down. So they decide to find for them some virgins that the men of the city are able to marry. So have a look at verse 8. And they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that came not up to Mizpah to the Lord? And behold, there came none to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For the people were numbered, and behold, there were none of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead there. And the congregation sent thither 12,000 men of the valiantest, and commanded them, saying, Go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, the women and the children. And this is the thing that ye shall do, ye shall utterly destroy every male, and every woman that hath lain with man. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any male. And they brought them up unto the camp Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So you can see from this that Jabesh Gilead has once again, or has in time past, been downtrodden, that all the males and the women who were not virgins had all been destroyed, and it was just the virgins that were taken from that city of Jabesh Gilead. So we can see that already it's a city that's been in a bit of trouble. And so perhaps easy pickings in some way for Nahash the Ammonite to come up against it. So that's a bit of background to the city of Jabesh Gilead. We'll refer a couple of other times to Judges chapter 20 a little bit later on. So just come back then to Samuel. The elders of Jabesh in verse 3 say unto Nahash, Give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers unto all the coasts of Israel, and then if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. And so they ask for these 7 days of respite, so they can find someone who might possibly be able to save them. Now, if you do a search for the period 7 days, it happens quite frequently. I thought, that's interesting, but then it's a week, so it's going to be quite a commonly mentioned length of time. It does appear quite frequently in the record of Noah. If you just come back to Genesis and chapter 7, just quite often in this record the period of 7 days appears, and this is one of those times where I'll probably make a reference and you think, well, what's it going there for? But maybe someone else will be able to make something else of it. So Genesis chapter 7 and verse 4. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So there's a period there of waiting for 7 days. Then again in verse 10, it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. So the waiting was over at the end of those 7 days. We then have in chapter 8, we're coming at verse 6. It came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And then verse 10, here's where we have our 7 days. He stayed yet another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. So he waits for a period of 7 days, and again sends the dove out of the ark. And then again, in verse 12, he stayed yet another 7 days, and sent forth the dove, and this time it returns not again unto him any more. So there's just a concentration of that length of time of 7 days, which you may or may not find interesting. So back in Samuel then, they send and they are hoping for someone who will come and save them. But if not, at the end of verse 3, we will come out to thee. And what were they hoping to happen when they came out to them? Well, I guess they could either have been taken captive or they could have been killed. There was no hope for them other than those two things. The idea of a covenant had been rejected. So for many of them, after that period of 7 days, if no one came to save them, they would have been coming out to die. So then in verse 4, we find that messengers are sent to Gibeah of Saul, and told the tidings in the ears of the people, and all the people lifted up their voices and wept. So the messengers have gone out. It doesn't sound like they've gone anywhere specific. They've just gone out to try and find some help. And they have come to Gibeah of Saul and told the tidings in the ears of the people. So they've told the people what's happened. And here's our next connection to incident back in Judges. If you just come back to Judges 21, so we're not going too far back really. Judges chapter 21, and this same phrase is picked up. So again, it's another link to this incident. Judges chapter 21, verse 2. And the people came to the house of God, and abode there till even before God, and lifted up their voices, and wept sore. So again, they're lifting up their voices, and they are weeping. And obviously they must have affinity with these people of Jabesh Gilead because of what's happening to them. So at this point they've come to Gibeah of Saul, but Saul, although he's been chosen to be king, is not in a leadership position, it seems. What is he doing? Well, have a look at verse 5. Behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field. So Saul's not ruling at this time. Saul has been in a field looking after the herd. And he comes out after the herd. So the herd's gone before him, and out he comes afterwards, and he's wondering, well, what's happened to all this people? What aileth the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. So this isn't the Saul that we see later on in the book of Samuel. Just have a look over a couple of chapters to chapter 18 and verse 8. We see Saul later on being a proud man. After the incident with David and Goliath, we know that Saul was not happy about it. Verse 8 of 1 Samuel 18, Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have any more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. So at this point in his kingship, he's quite a proud king. He's not happy that someone else is taking praise over him. And so he eyes David from that day forward. But that's not the picture that we get of Saul at this incident here. There he is in the field looking after the sheep, I assume. And no one goes to him specifically. He has to come out of the field and find out what's been going on. And so something happens in verse 6 which changes the picture completely. At this time, the people of Jabesh Gilead, they're in quite a desperate situation. But then, verse 6, the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard those tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. And so that changes the picture completely. We've got Saul who's coming out of the field because he's been looking after the sheep. But then in verse 6, the Spirit of God comes upon Saul. And just turn back to chapter 10, verse 6. A similar thing has happened previously, before he's chosen to be king. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 6. The Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them. So the Spirit of the Lord would come upon Saul, and we see that later on in the chapter. And so the situation changes from being desperate to being one where now God is in control of the situation and is going, well, his spirit is now upon Saul and he is able to take charge. Now we know later on in his life that the Spirit of God came upon Saul again, but it wasn't for a good reason. For here it's for the saving of the people of Jabesh Gilead. Just come with me to chapter 16 of 1 Samuel. So 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 14. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said unto him, Behold, now an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let now our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man who is a cunning player on an harp, and it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play it with his hand, and thou shalt be well. So the Spirit of God departs from him, and an evil spirit begins to trouble him. And again, if you just turn over to verse 23. It came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took the harp and played with his hand. And then again, just over in chapter 18, verse 10. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul. And then again, chapter 19 and at verse 9. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul. So it changes later on in his life, that the Spirit of God which came upon him in chapter 11 is taken away, and an evil spirit from God is sent to trouble him. But we can see from these verses that God's hand is in Saul's life, and it's always to bring about God's purpose. And his purpose in chapter 11 was the saving of Jabesh Gilead. So in verse 7, back in 1 Samuel 11, Saul gets to work. He took a yoke of oxen and hewed them in pieces and sent them throughout all the coasts of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. So he's under God's guidance now. This is what he's doing. He's sending to all the coasts of Israel to say, you need to come up, you need to help the people of Jabesh Gilead. Now, this is taking place in Gibeah, verse 4. Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul. Another connection back in Judges. If you just come back to Judges chapter 19 this time. Now this is the incident where the man whose concubine is abused all night divides up his concubine and sends it throughout the nation. Judges chapter 19 verse 29. And when he was come into his house, he took a knife and laid hold on his concubine and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces and sent her into all the coasts of Israel. So you've got something similar where something is divided up and it's sent to all the coasts of Israel. And I have neglected to put in my notes, verse 16 of Judges 19. Behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at even, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. So it seems that this incident is taking place in Gibeah also. So both incidents take place in Gibeah, and they involve dividing something up and sending it to all the parts of Israel. So again, another connection there with our story in Judges. And it is, of course, following on from this incident that we have the people of Benjamin killed, and then that's why the men of Jabesh Gilead are then killed and the virgins sought. So all these things seem to be linking together and bringing us, or linking us to this story in 1 Samuel chapter 11. And so, back in Samuel, God is at work, and all the people come. At the end of verse 7, the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. And if you look in your margin probably says as one man, and that's apparently more correctly what the Hebrew says. So they all come out together because the fear of God has fallen upon them all. And so they are numbered in Bezek. And remember, that was in the north of Israel, just on the other side to Jabesh Gilead. He numbered them in Bezek, verse 8. The children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. So that's the number of the people, and they are all going to be ready to fight. I think I've deleted something out of my notes. I'm sure that there is another link here to Judges and the number of the people, but perhaps we're about to take a look at that afterwards. So verse 9 in Samuel, they came and said unto the messengers that came, Thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, Tomorrow, by that time, the sun be hot, ye shall have help. So that was the message that the people of Jabesh Gilead wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that someone was going to come and help them. And so that message came. Tomorrow, by the time the sun be hot, ye shall have help. So at some point in the morning, before it's got to its hottest point, they were going to have help. And that word help, not a great translation. Deliverance is what it says in the margin. It's also the same word that's used at the end of verse 13, that the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. So, by that time the sun be hot, ye shall have salvation, is how that could be read. And so, it seems to be putting it in the past that they are going to have salvation. And we know that that would be the case, because God was with them. It was if they had already won. There was no doubt about it. They would have salvation. They would be saved. And then, fantastic understatement, at the end of verse 9, the messengers came and showed it to the people of Jabesh Gilead, and they were glad. And so, probably they were a bit more than glad. At the end of verse 15, the same word is translated rejoiced, which perhaps gives a better sense of how they felt. So salvation was going to come to them. And so, confident in this help, they send the message to Nahash, verse 10. Then the men of Jabesh Gilead said, Tomorrow we will come out unto you, and ye shall do with us all that seemeth good unto you. And so they're well within that 7-day deadline that they set themselves. It could almost be tomorrow, the next day. We don't know how long it took the messengers to get to Gibeah of Saul. And so they come out, verse 11, it was so on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch. And so they separate themselves into 3 groups, or 3 companies. Now the morning watch, I understand, is between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So very early in the morning, certainly before the sun was going to be warm. And then, carrying on reading in verse 11, and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. And so, by verse 9 it talks about, tomorrow by the time the sun be hot ye shall have help. And that was certainly the case. They came out in the morning watch, and they slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. So at midday, so by midday the Ammonites had been slain. So earlier on in the day, that had been when their salvation had come. And so the Ammonites are destroyed, although we shall see not completely. We see that they are scattered, and not 2 of them are left together. So God, working through the hands of Saul, has been able to bring salvation to these people of Jabesh Gilead. And the Ammonites have been destroyed, those people that came up against them. But it wasn't to be their final destruction. We'll see the Ammonites appearing again in the Old Testament. But their final destruction is prophesied, seems to be a number of times. We'll just have a look at the reference in Ezekiel chapter 21. So Ezekiel chapter 21, and we want to look first of all at verse 28. And now, son of man, prophesy and say, Thus saith the Lord God, concerning the Ammonites, and concerning their reproach. Even say thou, the sword is drawn. The sword is drawn, for the slaughter is furbished to consume because of the glittering. So the sword would be drawn upon the Ammonites. And then verse 31, I will pour out my indignation upon thee, I will blow against thee in the fire of my wrath, and deliver thee into the hand of brutish men, and skillful to destroy. Thou shalt be for fuel to the fire, thy blood shall be in the midst of the land, thou shalt be no more remembered, for I, the Lord, have spoken it. And we know that's the case, that apart from the Bible record that we have, not sure about any archaeology, the people of the Ammonites are no longer remembered, in contrast to God's people, the people of Israel, who to this day are in their land. And so that is the victory that Saul was able to bring over the Ammonites to save the people of Jabesh Gilead. And so we can think again of the time when the people of Jabesh Gilead, upon hearing of the death of Saul, was so keen to go and take hold of his body and make sure that it was not ridiculed by the people of the Philistines. And so that's the story behind it. Now at that time, not too many people were sorry to see Saul go. He had not turned out to be the king that the people were hoping for. But back in 1 Samuel 11, Paul is certainly a popular man, and everyone is happy with what he has done. Verse 12, there is a big response to the victory which has taken place. And the people said unto Samuel, this is back in chapter 11 of 1 Samuel, Who is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men, that we may put them to death. And so the people are now so enthused with what Saul has done for them, they want to find those people who said, let's not have Saul, and put them to death. And it's those people that we have already referred to at the end of chapter 10 of 1 Samuel. Verse 27, But the children of Belial said, How shall this man save us? And they despised him, and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. So the people want to seek out those men and put them to death. But here we see the merciful side of Saul at this time in his life. Saul is gracious to those who did not want him. Like in chapter 10 he held his peace, he didn't do anything about it. Verse 13 of chapter 11, Saul says, There shall not a man be put to death this day. For today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. So because of the salvation that God has brought, Saul says no one is going to be put to death. That phrase, salvation being wrought, comes out a number of times. We won't turn to there, but a similar phrase is used in Exodus chapter 14, verse 13, when they are about to cross the Red Sea. They're going to see the salvation of God. Come over there with me to chapter 19 of 1 Samuel and verse 5. We'll start reading from verse 4. So Jonathan's trying to persuade his father not to kill David. Verse 4 of 1 Samuel 19. And Jonathan spoke good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to theeward, very good. For he did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel, and thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? And so that same phrase is picked up here, that great salvation which God wrought when David was able to kill Goliath. The same phrase is used for the salvation that God has wrought in saving the people of Jabesh Gilead. And so the people rejoice, and verse 14 back in 1 Samuel, it's Samuel that says to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." So although, and we'll see in the next chapter that Samuel is very hesitant, he doesn't want the people to have a king over Israel. It's him that says to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." Now, this renewing of the kingdom, another translation for that word renew, is the idea of repairing. And just as a possibility, is it the repairing of the relationship between the people of Jabesh Gilead and the rest of the people of Israel and the Benjamites, all the things that we've briefly considered back in Judges? Is this the repairing of the people who are all brought together then under one nation, under the people of Saul? I don't know, just a suggestion. So verse 15, all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Now twice there we're told that things are done before the Lord. They made Saul king before the Lord. They made sacrifices and peace offerings before the Lord. So it seems to be a time, a spiritual time within the land of Israel. They know that it's God's hand that has brought deliverance for them. And so they're ready to rejoice together and to worship God together for what has been done for them. So things at this time in the kingdom seem to be quite good under the hand of Saul. So we've seen then that God was able to use Saul to deliver the people of Jabesh Gilead. We've got at this time, I think, a spiritual Saul, or a more spiritual Saul than we see later on in the book. And we see Israel becoming united under the King Saul, and we'll have to wait until future classes to find out what happens next. Thank you.